Hello, my name is Alexi Sinclair, and today I will be going into the topic of abortion in the United States, particularly in the light of the recent overturn of Roe v. Wade. Now, this topic is relevant today and impacts myself and women all over the country. For the purpose of this podcast, women is referring to any person who is able to give birth. To put it simply, my thesis is that the overturn of Roe v. Wade, which has resulted in and will continue resulting in the banning of abortion across the United States, is a violation on the rights of women in the United States. So, why did Roe v. Wade get overturned? The ruling has been protecting women's rights to abortion for over 50 years now. Why is abortion being questioned at all in 2022? It's impossible to know for sure, but I suspect that it's because of the rotation of justices on the Supreme Court. Justice Brett Kavanaugh was nominated to the Supreme Court in 2018 by President Trump, and former President Trump said he nominated him specifically to overturn Roe. Then in 2020, conservative Justice Amy Coney Barrett put abortion rights in grave danger when she joined the Supreme Court. Diving straight into the issue, let's hear from two individuals in Washington state who have opposing beliefs on the rights to abortion. First, we are going to hear from someone who is pro-choice and then someone who is pro-life. On the line, we have Emma. She is a recent graduate from the University of Washington. Thank you for being here, Emma.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So first of all, Emma, do you believe that abortion is a human right? And why or why not?
Yeah, I absolutely do think it's a human right. Essentially, if you boil down human rights, right, it's the ability to do, have autonomy and do what you want with your own body. And, if you go back to John Locke, your body and your possessions, I think it's, where a lot of laws started for equality and freedoms for people. So, if specifically if you're talking about, a bundle of cells in your own body, in your uterus, if you are someone who becomes pregnant, I think you absolutely have a human right to make decisions about your body, especially medical ones.
And going back to bodily autonomy, I think that it is less controversial in these days that women have bodily autonomy. I think that where the breakdown comes is that some people think that fetuses also have bodily autonomy. What would you say to someone who thinks that a fetus has so much bodily autonomy that it can override the autonomy of the woman?
Well, I think first, if you try to say you believe in human rights or equality, right? We're holding all people, people are equal. You would think those people would at the very least say, okay, well, the fetus might have equivalent rights to the woman. But the fact is, she is supporting the fetus, the bundle of cells. It's not actually a child yet. And that gets very, hard once you get down to how many weeks and when does it have a heartbeat and can it actually feel pain, which most fetuses can't for, most of the beginning of the pregnancy. So I think obviously you have to recognize here it's women, it's a full-grown individual who can support themselves and, they may have a fertilized egg in them, but it's always been crazy to me that people would try and elevate the rights of something, that isn't technically able to live on its own or necessarily think at certain points over the woman. Then you would say, well, is it bad to, let's elevate the rights of cows or animals or chickens, right? People kill those all the time and nobody has a problem with it. So, if we go down to the mechanics, it really doesn't make sense to elevate the rights of, federal cells over that of a full-grown individual.
So going off of that, in what ways would you say forced pregnancy and forced birth infringes on the rights of women?
Well, I think in a lot of ways. If you go back to it's a human right and your ability to have autonomy over your own body, you should be able to make that decision. And, you don't know what situation the woman is in. You don't know how she became pregnant, what the pregnancy will do. It could be endangering her life. So I think, she should absolutely have a right to make the decision regarding her birth. It's like if we said, mandatory vasectomies for all men, they came out with the law deciding that. People would just go crazy,
Exactly,
and it's, with any other thing, if you go to someone who, say, has some curable disease or something going on with their body, the doctors can always say, oh, there's a cure cure for this, we do have a cure, but you never force them. You know, you give them the option. You can have the cure, or you cannot. You can receive your flu shot, or you can't. You know, it's totally up to the patient to decide. But then when it comes to pregnancy, you know, it seems people want to step in and say, you know, it's our right to decide what this person does and their medical decisions.
And to your knowledge, how does the overturn of Roe v. Wade and the banning of abortion in some states infringe on the rights of women in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, literally, it is, you know, it will impact a lot of women or people who have uteruses, you know, physically, depending on if they're forced to have a baby, if they're allowed to have access to abortions or not. I think also, especially with the overturn of Roe v. Wade, it reflects a lot of things that are going on with politics in America in general. I mean, a lot of people see the U.S. as an extremely developed country, and considering all the things we, you know, have done, both good and bad, to see a place that generally grants more freedoms to more individuals than a lot of other places on earth, you know, make a decision that, you know, so clearly takes away the rights of almost half the population. I mean, I think it reflects a lot about how we talk to each other and how we listen to other people's views. And in this, you know, day and time, there's a lot more hostility and a lot less willingness to, you know, listen to someone and say, like, I can understand where you're coming from. You know, you should have the right to form your opinions and make your decisions. So to see that taken away, it's just, I think it represents a certain backsliding in the U.S., which also reflects, you know, the rest of the world. Because I think a lot of us never expected this to happen, right? Like, for a lot, I mean, we've had Roe v. Wade for how many years now? And then to see in 2022 it being taken away, it's just absolutely insane, you know? And you think, what if that happened in different countries in Europe, where we also tend to think of them as having more human rights? You know, I feel like the U.S. in some ways kind of sets a standard for what can happen in the rest of the world, whether that's good or not. I mean, you could argue both for and against that, but I think it, you know, has a huge impact, both, you know, physically for women, but also for, you know, speaking to the overall culture we have right now and how we talk to each other and things like that.
Yeah, and I think that what scares me a lot about taking away the legal right to abortion is that doctors can be, one of the reasons is that doctors can be prosecuted for even giving abortions or doing anything that seems like it might be giving an abortion, whether it's, you know, there's a dead fetus and there's a miscarriage happening, and assisting in making that miscarriage, you know, in helping the health of the woman, and that birth already isn't viable, and in helping that, doctors are afraid that they're going to be prosecuted and put in jail. So it's really, the legality of it is also just really concerning to the health of the mother at the time as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, yeah. This also makes me think, I've been thinking a lot about, like, the war on drugs with this is kind of a, you know, similar, like, restricting it or criminalizing them, it doesn't actually help anything, right? You're not providing the resources to the right people in the right area to essentially help people, you know? You're just criminalizing it, make it harder to access, and, I mean, we've seen how that goes. It doesn't really get anyone anywhere. It actually makes things a lot worse. So, I mean, just like you said, it makes abortions much less safe, and the fact is, a lot of women are still going to try to get them. We've already seen them trying to get them in the post-Roe world, and there's already, you know, countless stories of all the problems that arise with that.
So one last question for you that we sort of already touched on, going back to the autonomy of a fetus. What would you say to someone who argues that abortion is murder?
That's a tough one. I think, you know, that often is kind of a term used to rally people, you know, get people angry, get people, you know, joining the debate and saying pro-life and, you know, deciding what women should do with their bodies. I think at the end of the day, you know, it comes down to, you never know why someone might be getting an abortion. You don't know the reasons behind that. You know, you don't know if continuing to carry the baby is going to end the mother's life. You don't know if, you know, she's impregnated through rape. We don't know the reasons for it. And so I think the danger is in using this kind of blanket term and establishing blanket laws that affect everyone. you can believe abortion is murder or not, but you're ignoring everything else, all the other contributing factors that come into play, when women are deciding to have an abortion. And most abortions are performed early in pregnancy. I think it's less than 2 or less than 1% of abortions are performed in the third trimester, where a lot of things come in and where some people would consider them, to be signs of life, even though the baby still needs, the mother to be supported. So I think regardless of if you believe it's murder or not, because people tend to just get stuck in a loop with that argument, I think that is used to kind of distract from the real discussions we should be having about, let's look at the science and the data on when do abortions actually happen? What are the reasons? I mean, it's not a whole bunch of women deciding to maliciously kill, that could be a child one day. If you look at the actual reasons and the data behind this, there's so many other reasons that women choose to get abortions before the cells even become, potentially viable life. So I think it is used to kind of distract from the real discussions, and that's the danger of that.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and it was great having you on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Okay, so on the line we have Lene. Thank you so much for being here with us, Lene.
You are welcome.
Just a few questions for you. Do you believe that abortion is a human right?
No.
Okay, and why not?
I believe that anything that has a heartbeat is alive, and I don't think that anyone should be able to make the choice when they don't want that to commit murder, in my opinion. I do understand that there are extenuating circumstances. So I, unlike some other pro-lifers, believe that prior to the heartbeat, there should be, I don't want to say a grace period, but a period of time where someone that, has been sexually abused or someone that has been a victim of incest should be able to seek help and take action via the pill. But I think once it actually comes to physically removing the baby, so after a heartbeat is detected, I don't think that anyone has the right to do that.
Okay, so you mentioned that you think there should be exceptions in the case of, so do you agree there should be exceptions in the case of incest, rape, age? Or what do you think the exceptions should be?
Yeah, I think that the exceptions should be rape and incest. And like I said, I do think that should be pre-heartbeat, and I know that is an extremely difficult situation. But I do think that is enough time for people to seek help at one of the many facilities that are available.
Okay, so where it gets tricky is, what do you think about if the mother's health is compromised and she could end up losing her life with giving birth?
Currently, every state includes a life of the mother exception. So, as the law stands, there are no laws prohibiting, despite anecdotal story evidence. The facts show that there are no states allowed to actually prevent a mother from receiving an abortion if the mother's life truly is at risk. And the same thing goes for miscarriage. There are a lot of stories floating around right now that people cannot get care if they're having a miscarriage, and that, none of those stories are actually backed up by facts. That is just, the media's way of trying to overturn something that, quite frankly, I don't know how Roe versus Wade ever became a law in the first place. So to me, it's kind of crazy that there's as many protests and stuff as there are, because to me, I'm not sure how that ever became a thing to begin with.
Okay, so do you agree with that law then, that exception that mothers who may have health problems are allowed to get abortions?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, because that's where I feel like it gets tricky with the pro-life, because you want the mother to live, being pro-life, but then you also want the baby to live. So that's kind of where a lot of overlap happens. So you
I
mentioned...
think that's something that, like, as a nation, we can work on. I don't think that, despite, like, the extremes of both sides, I don't think that this is an issue that is black and white, and I can show, sympathy and empathy for certain situations. What I don't agree with is people using that as, like, their primary form of birth control, and that's really where we see, like, the highest amount of abortions is people just clearly having a lot of unprotected sex, and that's really where I struggle with the issue as a whole. But I think as a nation, whichever way, like, things end up swaying, I think that we do need to protect people that are having medical issues, and I do think we need to protect people that have become victims of, terrible circumstances.
Okay, and you mentioned earlier that you believe the statement that abortion is murder. Can you elaborate on that?
I mean, just like if I were to take the life of another person who is living and breathing and has a heartbeat, I see it as the same. I see it as the same thing, and that sounds like a harsh word, but when you are doing an act, when you're committing an act that is the only thing natural that actually creates life, and you're not taking responsibility for having sex, and you are purposely being irresponsible, I don't think that people should just be able to so easily get rid of their problems. And I think that we have made, people make light of abortion. I think it's a very serious issue. I mean, it can cause a lot of physical harm to the mother, and not to mention emotional damage that can never be undone. I mean, I know people personally that have gone through that and now regret it, and they're just an absolute mess. So yes, I would consider abortion murder.
Okay, and fetuses don't feel pain until around 23 weeks post-fertilization, and 90% of abortions happen before the 12th week. Does that change your opinion at all?
No.
Okay. So even a fetus that is unable to think or feel pain, that would still have the same protection as a full-grown person?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being a part of this project. I really appreciate hearing your opinion. Is there any other last comments you wanted to make?
No, I just I thank you for reaching out and listening to my opinion. I know this issue is one that especially, young people are taking into, like, consideration when voting and all that kind of stuff. So I appreciate you listening to my side, and I do listen to the side of others. And like I said, I think that has made me realize that it's not really a black and white issue. I think there are some things that definitely shouldn't be legal, but this can't be an all or nothing thing, in my opinion. I think we really need to work together on both sides so that we can come up with common ground.
Okay, that's a great point. It's not a black and white issue by any means. So thank you so much for your time, Lene, and it was great having you with us.
So as we can note from the interviewees, Emma and Lene, this is a very divided issue at the moment, and yet there is some overlap in that some pro-life people believe, such as Lene, that there should be exceptions for abortion in the case of incest and rape and health issues for the mother and miscarriages and things such as that. Not all people who are pro-life agree with Lene in this aspect, but it is worth noting that there is some overlap in beliefs between pro-life and pro-choice people. So now I'm going to go into particular instances within the law and the legality of abortion. First up is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, looking at Article 3, quoted, "Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person." Now, banning abortion nationwide would lead to a 21% increase in the number of pregnancy-related deaths overall and a 33% increase among Black women, and this is according to a new CU Boulder research. The study estimates that only a portion of increased deaths would be due to complications of being pregnant and delivering of a baby. Most increased deaths will be due to unsafe abortions or attempted abortions that would be in addition to these estimates. So, if you deny people abortion, pregnancy-related deaths will increase because staying pregnant is more dangerous to a woman than having an abortion, according to Amanda Stevenson, an assistant professor of sociology at CU Boulder. So basically, taking away the right to a safe abortion is going to lead towards women trying to perform abortions on their own and thus loss of life in that sense, which goes against Article 3 of the UDHR, the right to life. Now let's look at Article 12 of the UDHR. No one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with their privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attacks upon their honor and reputation. Everyone has the right to the protection of the law against such interference or attacks. Now this one I think is a lot more straightforward. Abortion ban is an interference in privacy and in family, in that abortion is a family decision. How many kids to have? This is a decision that the mother has to make, and it depends on the size of the family, the ability that the family has to support that many children, and in a lot of cases, a mother can decide to have an abortion because she already has too many children and is unable to give that additional child the quality of life that they deserve and provide food and clothing for them to have that quality of life. So it's an interference not only in privacy, in that this is literally a private matter, it is very intimate, it's a woman's uterus and her ability to do what she wants with her body, and it's also an interference in family life. Moving on to the Rome Statutes, Article 7, Section G protects against rape, sexual slavery, enforced prostitution, forced pregnancy, enforced sterilization, or any other form of sexual violence of comparable gravity. The banning of abortion obviously goes against this, in that the banning of abortion is clearly forced pregnancy, forcing women to go through with their pregnancy whether or not they are able to, whether or not they have the finances to do so or the ability to do so in their stage of life. Now let's look at the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which states that discrimination against women violates the principles of equality of rights and respect for human dignity. It's an obstacle to the participation of women on equal terms with men in the political, social, economic, and cultural life of their countries, hampering the growth of the prosperity of society and the family, and making more difficult the full development of the potentialities of women in the service of their countries and humanity. Now this correlates with the banning of abortion, in that forcing a woman to have a child limits her participation on equal terms with men in the political, social, economic, and cultural aspects of life. This is because she now has the responsibility of raising this child. Even if she decides to give the child up for adoption, she is limited during pregnancy. Now, women or those who identify as women do not always have the responsibility of rearing the child, as times have changed now. Men have also taken up that responsibility, yet parenting roles are far from equal. In fact, a recent study from the Population Resources Bureau found that mothers are far more likely than fathers or their counterpartners to be a disciplinarian of the children, and it is mainly the mother who plays with the children. Mothers are far more likely than fathers to provide emotional support for the children, and the mother is the one who mainly monitors the child's activities. Furthermore, mothers are more likely than their partners to take time off of work in case of disruptions for usual childcare arrangements than men, according to the National Center for Biotechnology. So this responsibility to rear the child still falls largely on the woman, which is not providing her equal opportunities as men in the involvement in political, social, economic, and cultural aspects of life. So it is obviously not on equal terms with men, and raising that child gives up time that woman could be spending engaging in the cultural aspects of life, engaging economically with a job, and because of hospital bills for childbirth, now the family has to take care of that. So there's definitely a sacrifice of these socioeconomic aspects of life that men will be enjoying still. Now going into domestic law, the United States Constitution. Now, in the initial Roe v. Wade ruling that allowed abortion, the court announced that, quote, 14th Amendment conception of personal liberty and restrictions upon state action includes a right to personal privacy or a guarantee of certain areas of zones of privacy, and that this right of privacy is broad enough to encompass a woman's decision whether or not to terminate her pregnancy, end quote. The 14th Amendment states that no states shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. And it is easy to see that the banning of abortion restricts women's right to life, which is in violation of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. This right to life is being violated with the overturn of Roe v. Wade. According to NBC News, quote, research suggests the bans and restrictions would have manifold effects on maternal health. For one, if more pregnant people can't get the abortions they seek, they'd shoulder the risk of the U.S.'s relatively high and rising rate of death from pregnancy-related causes. There are going to be women that will die from pregnancy because of this decision, period, said Dr. Amy Adonce, an OBGYN in Illinois and a fellow with Physicians for Reproductive Health. So clearly this is in violation with women's right to life. So how did this decision pass the Supreme Court? What was the justification by the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade? Well, taken directly from the Dobbs v. Jackson document decision that overturned Roe v. Wade, quote, we hold that Roe and Casey must be overruled. The Constitution makes no reference to abortion, and no such right is implicitly protected by any constitutional provision, including the one on which the defenders of Roe and Casey now chiefly rely, the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. That provision has been held to guarantee some rights that are not mentioned in the Constitution, but any such right must be, quote, deeply rooted in this nation's history and tradition, and implicit in the concept of ordered liberty, end quote. So that was their justification, is basically that the Constitution does not explicitly mention abortion, and therefore it's not protected. So what has the overturn of Roe v. Wade done so far in our nation? Well, leaving the decision of banning abortion up to each state has already led to some states banning abortion. States that have banned abortion so far right out is Wisconsin, South Dakota, Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky, and Missouri, with states soon expected to ban Idaho, Indiana, and Tennessee. On this map, you'll notice that any dark gray states are where abortions are currently banned or soon to be likely banned. Light gray states show protected or likely protected states, and light gray is to be determined uncertain. To finish up here, I am going to propose this policy recommendation. Now, it is clear that as such a divided nation on this topic, we are not going to come to a federal consensus. So that is why I've come up with these exceptions that I feel should be accepted across the board at a federal level, so that there are some exceptions on abortion and it can be up to states whether they want to take it further from there. So my policy recommendations are that on a federal level, There should be an exception for abortion in case of rape, incest, age of the mother, and health risks of giving birth. There should also be abortions. All abortions should be allowed prior to 23 weeks post-conception, no matter what the circumstance is. And the reason why I chose 23 weeks particularly post-conception is because technically, theoretically, that is before the fetus can feel pain. This study is still up for debate and not confirmed 100%, but theoretically, a fetus can feel pain after 23 weeks forward. Also, at 24 weeks, the fetus is considered viable to some standards. I personally don't agree with that because if you were to take a fetus out of the womb at 24 weeks, it would not survive. But there are some studies that suggest that there's some sort of level of viability at 24 weeks. So I think that 23 weeks and before, across the board, abortion should be illegal, no matter the circumstance. My final exception for an abortion is poor health of the fetus, meaning that the fetus is already struggling and would have a poor quality of life if born, or birth complications, or complicating the birth process. Perhaps the baby would be a miscarriage, we don't know. So in order to ensure the best quality of life for the potential baby, a obviously unhealthy fetus should be able to be aborted during the pregnancy. As divided as this nation is, as I can attest to in my research on this topic and in my interviews with both Emma and Lene, who you heard from today, I can say that while this nation is divided, there are also a lot of overlap. I think that we all believe that life is important and should be valued. It's just the different definitions of life that are causing this sort of disruption in communication between people. So no matter what your stance is, I hope you are able to take something away from this podcast. Please feel free to add any comments below. We always look forward to hearing new stories, new anecdotes, what your experience has been, and what you think about this debate. Thank you for joining us and have a good day.